It's time for us to talk about our core main event, and it is for the UFC interim bantamweight title. Petr Yan, the former champion, will hope to try and regain UFC gold, but to do so he needs to take on one of the division's best knockout artists in Cory the Sandman Sandhagen. Little bit of backstory to go along with this one. Of course, remember UFC 259. Petr Yan made the defense of his belt up against Aljamain Sterling. He's dominating that fight, and then fourth round, he lands an illegal knee that Sterling isn't able to recover from. Sterling is given the title by default. The rematch is supposed to take place at this pay-per-view. Unfortunately, Aljo ends up injured, and Cory Sandhagen steps in on short notice to fight for the interim belt. Now, I'm seeing a lot of people who are divided in regards to this fight. On the one hand, it's Petr Yan versus Cory Sandhagen, 5 rounds with a belt on the line. You can inject that into my veins. This, on paper, could be a fantastic matchup. But we are also seeing people who are quite rightly pointing out these are two guys who are both coming off losses. The first time in UFC history, two people will fight for the belt having lost their last fight. Does this somewhat damage the integrity of this fight and of this belt? The fact that both of them have ended up losing?
My answer to that is hell no, because both those guys didn't really lose those fights between you and me. Sandhagen, most people scored that fight for him. I think given him rounds 2, 3, and 5. And it was an extremely close fight, but I think when you look at the damage in that fight, I do think Sandhagen did more damage. And TJ probably got a little bit fortunate to win that split decision. Yan was on his way to either a 5th round knockout or a 49-46 decision over Aljamain. And that was cut short by the illegal knee. So both these guys not really coming off of losses between you and me. And it's an incredible fight. They were kind of rushing Aljamain into this rematch. They wanted Yan to fight at Fight Island. It seemed like Aljamain was a little bit reluctant to, but he eventually did sign the contract. And it seemed like he had some neck issue, I believe. He has a neck injury, and he basically said that he would hit a wall after 2 rounds of sparring, and he just didn't feel 100%. So the fight is being postponed, but that's cool with me because we already saw Yan versus Aljamain. We kind of already know who the better fighter is in that matchup. We got ourselves a fresh matchup here. I think a more entertaining stylistic matchup. And I can't wait for it. This is an A++ fight, as good as MMA gets. And huge fans of both these guys, bigger fan of Yan. But I have some concerns about this matchup, honestly.
And I'm very curious to hear. I'm very curious to hear what those concerns are. I should point out the bookmakers odds for this one here. Cory Sandhagen is a plus 200 underdog for this one. You can get Petr Yan at minus 240. I have to say though that the INC viewers on our opinion poll are giving Petr Yan much more chance than what the bookmakers are. At the moment, 78% of people are picking Petr Yan to win this one, so just 22% for Cory Sandhagen. Are you surprised by that?
Yeah, so 22%. The odds currently have him at 33%. So I guess the INC Live fans are one third less confident in him than the odds are. But yeah, I think that's a little bit too high for Yan. I'll start by voicing my concerns with Yan is that the guy tends to start slow. He doesn't come out of round 1, doesn't come out of the gate firing a high amount of strikes. He likes to download that information and make some reads, and then he starts unleashing that volume as the fight goes. And he's really, really accustomed to being a 5-round fighter. We saw in some 3-round fights of his, like the Jimmy Rivera fight, that fight was really close. And if it went into the full 5 rounds, I think that Yan would have, put a firm stamp on that fight. But it just shows that Yan was kind of used to fighting 5 rounds before we got to the UFC, and he still kind of has that 5-round style. Round 1 and 2 versus Aljamain were both very competitive. He dropped Aljo in round 1, then went on to lose round 2. But the second round 3 started, you see Yan start to up the pressure, up the output, and starts to really, put Aljamain on the back foot and starts to do good work. And I think that's what's going to happen here is that Yan's going to start slow like he typically does. Cory's going to be pumping out that volume. And there's a good chance that Cory wins round 1 and that he might even win the first 2 rounds, honestly. And then I think Yan is going to start to pick up the pace, to start to dig to the body, start to get his game plan going, which I think is going to be incorporated in the clinch and incorporating wrestling as much as possible, because Cory Sandhagen is simply just not a good wrestler. He just doesn't do well in these wrestling grappling positions. He has that long, lanky frame, which is often not good for wrestling. And we've seen throughout several of his UFC fights him be in bad grappling positions. He's in deep submission attempts. He's getting controlled. And TJ Dillashaw was able to get there a lot. He got to that clinch. He got to that back clinch situation where TJ is just holding him from the back, knee in his thighs, dragging him back down to the mat. And TJ Dillashaw got a significant amount of time from that back clinch in their fight. And I think that Jan's going to want to do the same. We saw in the Aljamain fight that this guy can not only offensively strike and defensively grapple, he can hit his own offensive takedowns. He can reverse your takedown attempt and take you down in the process. So I think that we're going to see Jan's grappling, Jan's clinch game coming to play here. And I'll pass it back to you before I give my official prediction.
I think it's a good thing that you pointed out Petr Yan's slow starts as well, because that was a point I was going to make. Like Jimmy Rivera, in my opinion, he could have very easily won that first round if it wasn't for that knockdown right at the end. And even in the second round, Rivera was causing some problems. And we saw it also with John Dodson, that he was quite a slow starter in the first round. And even Uriah Faber, who was like 4,000 years old by the time they fought. Even Faber had a decent run in that first round. It was only in the second where sort of like the age and the quality of Petr Yan showed. And when you look at what Cory Sandhagen's been able to do at the start of his fight, the flying knee up against Frankie Edgar, he nearly caught TJ Dillashaw in a triangle right at the start of their fight. So Cory Sandhagen can start fights very well as well. So there is a chance of Sandhagen catching him early. I agree with you though. I think that Petr Yan, he is a 5-round fighter, and he's going to start working the body. I don't trust Cory Sandhagen's striking defense, and I can see Petr Yan winning this one by targeting the body and just Cory Sandhagen wilting by the end of the 4th round.
Yeah, I like that pick as well. I think the body work, considering that Sandhagen's the one taking this fight on short notice, Sandhagen's going to have to travel a whole lot further than Yan is for this one. And, the fight against TJ was only, 3 months ago? And I think he struggled a lot in that fight. I mean, TJ coming off a 2.5-year layoff, was able to get a lot of that clinch, a lot of that control time I was talking about. And I just don't think that Cory is really making significant improvements in his defensive grappling. Like, I have very little doubt in my mind that Aljamain would do the same exact thing that he did to him the first time if they rematched. Because if you're letting TJ Dillashaw, he was kind of slow and hittable at range in that fight. He got dropped by Cory in round 2. Even he was able to persevere through that striking, able to get inside and get that clinch. Aljamain's a lot more elusive and janky. He always has that way to get inside on you. And I have seen nothing from Sandhagen to think that he would that fight against Aljamain would go any differently. And in that last fight, Aljamain versus Yan, we saw that Yan is actually a better wrestler than Aljamain is. I mean, anytime Aljamain attempted a takedown, Yan would easily reverse it and hit his own takedown. He had 7 takedowns versus Aljamain. So I think that I think that Peter is going to mix in the wealth of his skills to win this fight. I think he will lose the first round or two. He's definitely going to lose one of those rounds, in my opinion, but he's going to pick it up the pace. He's going to start digging to the body, and he's just going to use his huge arsenal of skills to break Cory down as the fight goes. I think rounds 3, 4, and 5 pretty heavily favor Petr Yan here, and I think he's going to pull away with either a late 4 or 5 round stoppage, like you said, or a 49-46 type of decision for Yan here.
Do you think we can see Petr Yan potentially using his wrestling a lot in this fight, bearing in mind the success that Sterling had against Sandhagen?
Yeah, I definitely think we will. I think Cory's size, his length, his output is going to give Yan problems at range. And one thing I'm having nightmares about already, because I rewatched the Aljamain fight yesterday, and Aljamain got close with 2 flying knees in their first fight, and we know well that Cory loves throwing those flying knees. So I'm kind of scared about that, but Cory also loves throwing spinning strikes, and TJ was able to time a lot of those spinning strikes and able to get that clinch, get those takedowns. And I do think that Cory's, versatile striking is going to open up those opportunities to be controlled, to be taken down. And I don't think Jan's going to, take him down and hold him down for 4 minutes. But I think in rounds when the striking is close, that clinch game, that takedown game of Yan is going to be the X factor to swing these rounds in favor of Yan.
It's going to be a very interesting fight, and as mentioned before, the bookmakers have this one as the closest fight on the main card. I'm leaning towards Petr Yan to win this one. I assume you're feeling the same way.
I am, but in terms of a bet, though, I think Cory at 2-1 is going to look good in the first 10 minutes. I think if you want to bet Yan in this fight, look to live bet him. I think 5-10 minutes into the fight, the line is going to be a lot tighter than it is now. So I don't knock a bet on Cory at all. I think he's going to start well. I just don't think he can really sustain that against the more versatile and adaptive fighter.
And who do you think the UFC are rooting for to win this fight? Because both of these guys are going to be fighting a rematch with Aljamain Sterling. Petr Yan, of course, many people see him as the uncrowned champion. Cory Sandhagen, with his fighting style, might be that sort of casual, friendly fighter that the UFC may feel that the bantamweight division needs.
That's a good question, honestly. I would lean towards Yan, because they did give him Aldo versus Yan, for was that an interim title at the
That
time?
was the full thing.
I think so, yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah, so Hugo vacated the belt, and then they did Yan versus Aldo.
Yeah, so I think that's, that kind of points in the favor of Yan. But Cory's active. He's an extremely fun fighter. I think the UFC is kind of indifferent. I'd say like 51% of them want Yan to win, but I think there's a lot of people who would like Sandhagen to win too.